Learn to Fight. I'm your host, Manny. And today we're getting into the history of martial arts. There's so many different martial arts, and a lot of them are nonsense. A lot of them are real. A lot of them are forgotten knowledge. And I noticed this when I started watching Jon Jones and Anderson Silva. I noticed that they were doing Wing Chun moves, and I always thought Wing Chun was a joke. Turns out some of the moves are legit, so we're going to get into it. I'm feeling good, been hitting the gym, testosterone's through the roof, stronger than ever, as you can see, stronger than ever. I'll be fighting in September, probably putting in work right now, but let's get into it. There's nothing new under the sun. So I get into it with this kid on Reddit, and we're talking about martial arts. I honestly just wanted to ask the question about Wing Chun because I'm genuinely curious. In all these martial arts schools, especially these MMA schools, we're learning jiu-jitsu, we're learning Muay Thai, we're learning boxing, and wrestling, of course. These are widely known as the martial arts that work. But when you get into the higher levels, you have to be more creative. So I studied Jon Jones. Jon Jones, turns out he's doing a lot of Wing Chun moves, with the hand traps and such. So, I genuinely asked a question like, hey, where can you learn Wing Chun? And, people were lighting me up saying, oh, you're an idiot. Wing Chun isn't real, blah, blah, blah. I don't know, but I'm keeping an open mind. And in my research, it brought me to basically realize that there's nothing new under the sun. And the fighters of the past were way better than the fighters of today. So that brings us to ancient Greece and the art of pankration. A lot of you guys probably never heard of pankration. So before there was UFC, before there was MMA, before there was boxing, there was pankration. There's pankration in ancient Greece. In ancient Greece, for 800 years, they were already doing boxing, kickboxing, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, everything that we do today. And we think that we're cutting edge when it comes to martial arts has already been done. Seriously, it's already been done. And we're probably doing it worse than the guys of the past. There's so many different martial arts: judo, jiu-jitsu, Wing Chun, boxing, wrestling, kung fu, karate, taekwondo. There's a million martial arts, and they're all legit. They're all legit. It really just depends on the practitioner, I know taekwondo guys who are high level who will kick the head off of legit MMA fighters when it comes to striking. I know jiu-jitsu guys who couldn't fight their way out of paper bag. I know boxers who would knock people out, but they get taken on the ground. It's over with. So every martial art is actually legit. And we look at the history of these martial arts, they were all made for war. Originally, they were made for war, and they were made for life or death scenarios and knowing how to fight, and also to keep your mind right and stay strong. So that brings us to ancient Greece, pankration. A lot of you guys have never heard of pankration. So you guys already know when I put my glasses on, it means I'm not fucking around. It means we're getting into some good shit. We're getting into some serious shit. We're doing research. I got my glasses on. Let's go. Pankration. The name derives from the ancient Greek words pan, which means all, and kratos, strength, might, power, and literally means all of the might. In 648 BCE, the pankration was introduced as a sporting event in the 33rd Olympic Games, where it joined boxing and wrestling in a category called heavy events, and it evolved for 800 years. So the biggest UFC pales in comparison to what they were already doing in the past. And when we look at guys like, I love that scene from Troy, Achilles, Brad Pitt's character. He goes in and they settle the war with two warriors who fight to the death. That's what they were doing in the past. And the warriors were elite, so in the past, and also another movie, the movie Gladiator. Gladiator is a great movie. It's a perfect example. The warriors of the past were way, way stronger than today. And like I always say, testosterone levels are on the decline. Fitness is on the decline. People are getting weaker and weaker and weaker as time goes on. We go to the past, we're so arrogant today that a lot of us think that we're just so smart and everything we're doing is cutting edge. And that's why I got into this argument with this guy. And he was like, oh, well, we figured out all this martial arts stuff already. We figured out that Wing Chun doesn't work. We figured out X, Y, and Z. Nah, they had it figured out in the past. If you ever see the statues of, these ancient Greek fighters, they had crazy cauliflower ears. They were super strong. They were super jacked. I'm feeling ridiculously jacked right now. You guys see that? Hold on. Can you guys see that? I'm feeling ridiculously strong right now. Whoever I fight next is in big, big trouble. But the fighters of the past, they were way, way tougher than the people of today. And also they had 800 years to evolve and 800 years to figure out fighting and figure out what works. So you could only imagine the highest level champion of today, if we drop them back in the day and have them fight, whatever the top fighter was in the Pankration days, they would get destroyed. They'd get absolutely wrecked. Somewhere down the line, we forgot how to fight. The knowledge was forgotten. People became too soft. But for 800 years, they were figuring out how to fight, and they were celebrating fighting, and it was the highest sport, in ancient Greece. There's so many pieces of art that show this, the sheer strength that the athletes had. The guy who created judo, the name slips my mind right now, but the guy who created judo was so ridiculously strong. He would wrestle cows and choke them out. There's video of it, I believe. So if you take the average judo guy today, you're not gonna be able to do that. Although there is a lot of legit judokas still in the world, But that brings us to the fact that 800 years to evolve. So let's put that in perspective. MMA has been around for about 30, or let's see, at least UFC has been around for 30 years. MMA has been around for a little bit over 30 years. Let's say 40 years. Now, when we go to the early days, in the early days in, was it Pankration? I believe there was a event called Pankration in Japan. That's where Bas Rutten was fighting. We go to those days, they're fighting with the open hand slaps, and there's really good fighters like Bas Rutten in his prime is very good. But we go to there, and then we fast forward a few years to Pride. Fast forward a few years to Pride. Fast forward a few years to Royce Gracie and UFC 1. In UFC 1, it was insane. The fights were crazy. The fighters themselves weren't that good. Royce obviously had great jiu-jitsu, and he was able to roll everybody up, choke everybody out with his jiu-jitsu. But the fighters overall really weren't that good skill-wise, And then the next generation, 5, 6 years, 7 years, those fighters were way better than the guys of Royce's time. Then the next generation, that's when you get guys like Vitor Belfort, Andrei Arlovski, these different fighters who really took the game to a next level. Vitor Belfort was the first like really good boxer in MMA who had also a ground game. Now, then we fast forward, what, 15 years, and then you get someone like Jon Jones, then you get GSP, then you get Anderson Silva, then you get these guys coming in who are completely different and who would demolish the guys of the past. You go even further, you get Tyson, or you get Francis Ngannou. If you take Francis Ngannou versus any heavyweight of the past, especially in the early days, he's going to absolutely destroy them and wreck them and maul them. That all happened in 40 years. So now if we take the 800 years of Pankration and how much they would have evolved and how the knowledge that they would have been very intimate, because it's a life or death thing. And it's a very barbaric time. But also it's a very high society as well, ancient Greece. We structure our society a lot off of ancient Greece. So the fighters would have just been on a different level, 800 years, and all they do is train. That's just what they do. And then not only that, it's one of the biggest event, if not the biggest event of the year when these guys fight. So if you're, in the movie Gladiator, the gladiators became more powerful than the top politicians because they were just the superstars. They put on amazing fights. They fought to the death. The bravery, the courage, the strength, all these things displayed made it to where the gladiators were actually more powerful and more famous than the actual rulers. And that's what the movie Gladiator is about, to the point where some of the politicians would come in and try to be gladiators themselves and try to rig the game, So you could imagine how hard these guys were training and how strong they were. We've seen the statues of how strong these guys were. The top fighter in the world, Jon Jones, his background started in Greco-Roman wrestling, and that's what makes him so great, is his Greco-Roman wrestling. So if we take a gladiator, 800, from at the peak of the Pankration era, and we put him against Jon Jones is probably going to get mauled, Seriously, it sounds crazy to say, but we're so arrogant in our beliefs that, we're so advanced. The people of the past were extremely smart. They really, really were. And the evidence of that is in the pyramids. We can't build the pyramids today. We don't even know how they were built. Evidence of that is in places like Göbekli Tepe. We can't build Göbekli Tepe. There's so many things that we were able to achieve in the past that we can't do now, or is so watered down now. Nikola Tesla was a genius, right? He's like, what, 200 years ago, right? Or some whatever, So yeah, people are actually getting watered down, actually in every aspect, but there's nothing new under the sun. Before MMA, there was Pankration. The key characteristics of Pankration include techniques. Pankration techniques include striking, punches, kicks, open hand strikes, and grappling, throws, takedowns, joint locks, chokes. The aim is to subdue the opponent using any means necessary except for biting and gouging the eyes. Rules. The primary rules were minimal, focusing on avoiding the most severe forms of injuries. Competitors fought until one was incapacitated, submitted, or in some cases died. Matches could take place in a variety of settings, from sandy areas to open fields. Training. Pancrationists trained rigorously to develop strength, speed, endurance, and technique. Training included sparring, conditioning exercises, and practicing various holds and strikes. So, yeah, nothing is new under the sun. Everything that we're doing today, especially in the fight game, has already been done. It's literally already been done. When I found that, it blew my mind, because here I am thinking that, you know, the fighters of today, the martial artists of today, are so much better and so much wiser and so much stronger than the people of the past. And when you do your research and you do your history, it's just not the case. It's just not the case at all. It's not even close to the case. They knew that if you fight somebody with your bare knuckles and you punch them, you're going to break your hand. So they're open hand striking, palm striking. The palm strike is actually an extremely powerful move. If you palm strike somebody, boom, in the right spots, it's going to do crazy damage and you're not going to break your hand. So in a real life scenario, when you're fighting somebody, if you really have to fight somebody, like not just like a one punch thing where you're really fighting somebody for an extended period of time, open hand palm strikes are very, very serious, seriously damaging blows. So they were open hand palm striking people. They were doing chokes. They were doing joint locks. They were wrestling. They were doing takedowns. They were doing everything. On top of that, they were training. They were doing strength and conditioning. You know, they were getting faster. They knew how to box. You know, this is crazy stuff. I had no idea about none of this. I had no clue about none of this. They literally knew how to box. And boxing is even older than I understood it to be. I thought boxing started in like the late 1800s. Boxing's been around for a long, long time. You know, all this stuff's been around for a long time. Jiu-jitsu, you know, Elio Gracie and the Gracie family get a lot of credit for jiu-jitsu. They deserve the credit for jiu-jitsu and transforming it, turning it into what it is today. But however, jiu-jitsu has been around for a very long time. It's been around far longer than, you know, Elio Gracie and these guys who brought it to the public. You know, people were doing judo for a long time, and the judo that they were doing was they were doing barambolos. They were doing all types of moves that we constantly rediscover. You know, and people act like they're new moves or say that they're new moves when they're not. You know, I seen a video of someone doing a berimbolo in the 1800s. You know, in a judo practice. So they were doing jiu-jitsu in the ancient in the ancient Greek era. They literally they call it catch wrestling. They had pictures of people getting choked out, people getting arm barred, people getting their arms broken, you know. So this is very, very, you know, eye-opening stuff when it comes to martial arts, you know, and when it comes to our understanding of martial arts and how good we are today, you know, and how good we aren't today, you know, seriously. So, you know, always got the matcha on deck. The fights of the past, you guys, I've never been to Rome, but the Colosseum is still here today. Colosseum would have so many people in there, and the gladiators would fight to the death or have the Pankration games. Modern day UFC, right? The biggest UFC event, I believe, was McGregor versus Khabib, and it pales in comparison to what they were doing back then, you know? So don't get it twisted, you know? Don't ever get it twisted and think that the martial arts of old aren't legit. You know, I was arrogant at one point and thought, oh, we have it all figured out. We have everything understood, you know, because there's so many fake martial arts out there. You know, I would have never thought that Wing Chun could be legit. I honestly, when I started martial arts, I thought Taekwondo was nonsense just because I saw so many bad Taekwondo teachers and kids getting black belts after 2 years or 1 year, you know, and they're a black belt. But Taekwondo is one of the most dangerous martial arts there is if you really do it the proper way. And the fighters who are high level Taekwondo fighters who really know how to fight are some of the most hardest fighters to deal with, like Michael Page, who's fighting this weekend, like Wonder Boy Thompson, like Anthony Pettis, So it's important to keep an open mind and to understand and not be arrogant. Understand that people in the human race, the human history, have been fighting from day one. And they got really good at it. They got really, really good at it. And when it comes to Wing Chun, it's so interesting and fascinating to me because it's like I'm getting hit with a new love for martial arts because there's so much more to learn. It's a never-ending process. It's a never-ending thing. Right when you think you know a lot of things, you don't know anything. And when you hit higher levels as you go on, you need to have more moves that people haven't seen. So if Anderson Silva, was known to be the best fighter at one time, is out there doing Wing Chun, what makes you think you're so smart and so ahead of the curve that Wing Chun is a joke? Tony Ferguson is out there doing Wing Chun. What makes you think you're so smart and you have it figured out that it's Wing Chun's a joke? Kevin Holland currently fights, and he claims he's a kung fu fighter. To me, it looks like he's just doing Muay Thai and karate and stuff like that. But he says he's a kung fu fighter. Maybe that's more of a mental thing. Maybe it's more of a mindset philosophy thing about how he fights. But my point is to not think you have it all figured out. For me, I'm a professional fighter, so for me, I'm always thinking about fighting. But if I kept a closed mind and thought Wing Chun was trash, I wouldn't have learned a new move. And that kind of goes and bleeds into everything in life because when you keep a closed mind, you really shoot yourself in the foot. And a lot of times, some of the stuff you think is goofy is actually not. Like when you're a kid and your parents are telling you, "Hey, don't do this. Hey, don't do that." You're like, "I got it figured out. I got it figured out. Whatever." But then you grow up a bit and you find out like, oh, they were legit. They knew what they were talking about. It's the same exact thing. There's a lot of terrible instructors out there. There's a lot of bad martial artists out there. There's a lot of terrible schools because their lineage has been washed down and washed out. And there's a lot of snake oil salesmen. But if you're able to find the true martial art and the true stuff and the true systems of it, then that's definitely worth doing. And you should never keep like a super closed mind when it comes to martial arts and fighting. That's what I believe. That's what I believe. But punches through time, the ancient origins of boxing. Like I said, I always thought that, when I thought of boxing, I always thought of Muhammad Ali, Marvin Hagler, Jack Dempsey, Joe Louis, Joe Frazier, Sonny Liston, but the history of boxing goes a lot further and a lot deeper than what meets the eye. Boxing, and it only makes sense because people have been throwing hands since before they had weapons, so boxing goes way, way back, dates back to the 3rd millennium BCE in Mesopotamia, formalized by the Greeks in 688 BCE Olympic Games. Boxers use leather thongs to protect their knuckles. Yeah, I don't know what that's about. Leather thongs to protect their knuckles? Pause. Bouts continued until one opponent couldn't continue. Emphasize skill, endurance, and raw power. Take a look at this. I want you guys to see this. These are old pictures of boxing, ancient pictures. This right here is a picture, boxing picture from ancient Greece. So boxing's been around for ridiculously long time. But what's even crazier is MMA's been around for even longer, you know? And it just now, in our mind, you know, if you're a casual, you're going to think that it's only been around for, 40 years or whatever. It's been around since thousands of years, and we're just now coming back around to it. So that's funny to me and interesting to me how as time goes on, we kind of forget things and we lose things and we become less smart, and then we have to go back and find things. And then we think we invented something new. We think we found something new, but there's really nothing new under the sun. I'm going to look into the boxers of the past and see what they were about, and see how great they were, how tough they were, how strong they were, because I know that boxing, as time has gone on, it's become more sterile. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing at all. In the past, they were doing 7-hour. The longest boxing match ever was 7 hours. And the dudes were never, ever the same again after that fight. So I can only imagine in the ancient Greek days how long their matches went, because if you're dirt poor and you're boxing, it's a little bit different, and you're boxing, you don't care about injury, you don't care about none of that, So, and they just went until someone couldn't go no more, So I'm sure they got really good at boxing. I'm sure they got super good at boxing, I never really knew much about the Olympics like that. Maybe I'm dumb. Maybe I'm the one late to the party, but I had no idea that they had pancration in the Olympics. I had no idea that they had boxing in the Olympics way, way back. This is all news to me, so it's like MMA should be back in the Olympics today. It only makes sense. It was in the past. So pancration, how the ancient Greek god Hercules and its lineage in MMA. And then we have right here a picture of Hercules doing a guillotine and a picture of Brian Ortega doing a guillotine on Volk. So I was looking into catch wrestling, and catch wrestling is ancient. It goes back to the pancrase days. All the moves that are so-called jiu-jitsu today have been done for thousands of years. Hercules put the lion in the guillotine, put him to sleep. Modern day, Jon Jones puts Lyoto in a guillotine, puts him to sleep. Modern day, Justin Poirier gets people in guillotines, tries to put them to sleep. But this move has been around forever. It's been around forever, so it's just funny to me, because maybe it's just me, but when I grew up, I was under the impression that currently we're the smartest we've ever been, and the people of the past were just idiots and they were just barbaric and they didn't know anything. They didn't know better, but it's just really not the case, and that's why history is so important. And when it comes to martial arts, knowing the history of martial arts will make you a better fighter, a better martial artist, the understanding where it comes from and why it was started and what martial art is the oldest, and what martial art has the most lineage, and it would seem that the pancrase fighters, of old were real dogs, real dogs, and and it shows, in my research, putting a lion in a guillotine is crazy. But this dude is strong enough to put a lion in a guillotine, So imagine if he got your neck. The guys of today are not that strong. That's what this is about. I'm trying to get back to that just crazy barbaric strength, and get my testosterone levels through the roof, like the old school cats. So in the movie Troy, Achilles is an ancient warrior who is, known to be the best. His only weakness is his Achilles tendon. You know, he got shot. He got shot with the arrow, and it hit his tendon, and he couldn't. You know, that's how he lost, right? But before that, he was just undefeated, just ruthless, amazing strategist, and no one could beat him. All this stuff, right? So, and he finished wars with just one-on-one fights with their toughest warrior. You know, so you could imagine, and here's depictions of the old school days of wars. You know, so you could just imagine, you know, what they were like back in the day. You know, ridiculously strong. The strongest fighter we have today is Jon Jones, you know, and Francis Ngannou. But when you look at some of the pictures of the guys of old, they look pretty strong. They look ridiculously strong and ridiculously tough. So I'm curious to see how they would stack up. George St. Pierre believes that the fighters of today would not match up to the fighters of the past in the Pankration days when they were really doing Pankration like brutally, you know. So that's something that's very, very interesting to me, and in a interesting concept, because what would happen, you know, if those guys of old fought today, you know. They say respect your elders because of the amount of knowledge that they've had, the life experiences that they've had. And when we talk about martial arts and we're in this discussion about pancrase and, you know, and fighting, it's interesting because we like current war generals of today look up to guys like Marcus Aurelius. They look up to guys like Sun Tzu. They look up to guys like Miyamoto Musashi. You know, they still learn lessons from them and their teachings that were like hundreds of years ago, you know, maybe even thousands of years ago. So, so the knowledge that these guys had in the past is still extremely powerful today, you know, and that's why you should respect your elders, you know. To get to the point that we have gotten to as a human race, we had to learn a lot. And that's why you should respect all martial arts, you know, and try to search for the answers, you know, search for the answers, try to get better. There's a lot of power in ancient knowledge, you know. That's how Nikola Tesla created his tower. The biggest invention that he ever created was the tower, you know. And he was able to get that knowledge because he studied the pyramids, he studied ancient, you know, technology and stuff like this. And through all this, he was able to get the information for creating the tower, you know, standing on the shoulders of the people in the past. So respect all martial arts, respect your elders, respect the people of the past. You know, they knew what they were doing when it comes to fighting. They fought more than we currently do. And thinking that we're so smart, and so much better is just not correct, you know, because that's how I used to think. Like when I started learning martial arts when I was a teenager, I was thinking like I could just beat up anybody, you know, I could just beat up anybody because I knew a couple moves. I could beat up this guy, beat up that guy. You know, they couldn't touch me. And it's just not the case. You know, there's a lot of people who know how to fight. There's a lot of people who know stuff that you might not even know, you know. Wing Chun, Krav Maga, Kung Fu, Muay Thai, boxing, kickboxing, Jiu-Jitsu, Taekwondo, karate, Jeet Kune Do. You know, there's so many martial arts. There's just so much to learn when it comes to the human body, and when it comes to fighting. It's a never-ending thing. and it goes hand in hand with life, you know. Respect your elders, you know, respect your parents and the people who came before you, because they have a lot of knowledge that you probably don't have, or you could get to somewhere quicker by learning that knowledge, you know. And that's why I always try to go back to the book, The Art of War. It's so interesting to me that The Art of War was written thousands of years ago, but it's still the #1 book that war generals read to create strategies. It's still one of the top books that people read to dominate in business, you know. And that's just, it's wild. Knowledge is true knowledge is timeless. You know, true knowledge is timeless. And that goes in martial arts, it goes in everything. Miyamoto Musashi talked about, once you know the way, you'll see it in all things. And that's very interesting. You know, Miyamoto Musashi's Book of Five Rings is one of the most interesting books ever written, as far as I'm concerned. If you've never read that book or seen some of the stuff in there, you should check it out. It's very, very interesting. So, yeah, all of that came from me getting into it with this kid on Reddit. And he was saying, you know, Wing Chun was a joke and it's false and it's fake and blah, blah, blah. Called me a casual in MMA. Yeah, imagine that. So basically, just keep an open mind, you know, keep an open mind. There's a lot of martial arts out there and there's a lot to learn. You know, there's the fights this weekend, Jiří Procházka versus Alex Pereira. I got Alex Pereira winning. First round left hook knockout. I have Brian Ortega winning by submission, probably triangle choke against Diego Lopez. I hope Andrei Arlovski is able to get the win in his fight. I got MVP winning against Garry knockout, you know. And that's actually a perfect example of what I'm talking about when it comes to respect your elders and all that. MVP is a seasoned fighter, been doing it a long time, very high-level striker. And you have Garry, the young kid coming up, kind of feels like he knows it all. And he's underestimating Michael Page. And I think it's going to be a big, big mistake for him. I think it's going to be real bad for him. You know, one thing you learn real quick in martial arts is like, you can't underestimate anybody. Before you get your ego destroyed and your ego checked on the mat, at least for myself, I can only speak for myself. I thought I would just be able to beat anybody up. You know, like, oh, if this guy does this, I'll just get super mad, beat the dude up. You know, I got into a lot of fights with, you know, my friends growing up and stuff like that, you know, just regular stuff. And, you know, I thought I would be able to handle myself. First day, got on the mat, got thrown around, slammed around, got lumped up, you know, so, and your ego gets wrecked. And you have to realize that, you know, you're not all that, you know. So I feel like Garry hasn't really had that ego check yet, you know. He hasn't really had the ego check. And it's just a good thing to have, you know, to get humbled and to learn, you know, what it is to truly fight and to learn what it is about, because all these lessons that you learn in fighting go hand in hand with life, you know. So you get humbled in the ring, you get humbled on the mat, you know, you kind of go into life a little bit more humble. Can't underestimate nobody. You know, you might think that guy looks like a nerd and he looks weak, but maybe that guy has a big fighting spirit. You know, maybe that guy's very technical, you know. So that goes back to, you know, respect, you know, respecting the game, respecting your elders, respecting this stuff. There's a video of some old man knocking out some young dude, you know, in a boxing ring. And the young dude was obviously underestimating the old man. You know, George Foreman became heavyweight champion in his 50s because he had so much knowledge when it comes to fighting, and he's in heavyweight. So Bernard Hopkins, you know, I believe Bernard Hopkins was also in his 50s, you know. So knowledge is power. And when it comes to this ancient knowledge, you know, I'm trying to learn as much as I can from these ancient people, you know, and the ancient Greeks with Pankration. I think they were the best martial artists currently. You know, that's what I currently think. Ancient Greece, Pankration, they were the best martial artists. You know, they had 800 years of experience, 800 years of trial and error, 800 years of fights, 800 years of events. You know, they had the biggest events. Look at the statues of the fighters they had. These guys were super athletes. You know, these guys were beasts. So, and notable fighters like GSP even say, like, you probably couldn't beat the guys of the past. You know, so if that's why history is so important and so interesting to me. There's just so many lessons that can be gained from the past, you know. And for me as a fighter, it helps me become a better fighter. So yeah, best martial art currently as of right now, what I think is Pankration, which is just mixed martial arts, you know.
Imagine you're an old person. You had the opportunity to live a long, healthy life. You're looking back on your life and you see so much squandered potential, so many mistakes made, so many failures, some things done right. But the reason that you didn't achieve your potential was because you sought out comfort instead of discipline. You weren't focused and you didn't stay motivated towards your goals. You didn't evolve. Now imagine you're a young person or middle aged. You're every day is a fight, every day is a war, but you're in the fight. You're really, really trying to get your goals. You might fail. You might be getting just destroyed. You might be getting wrecked left and right, like Will Smith in Pursuit of Happiness. You're just really going through it. But now you finally break through and you finally hit your goals, regardless of whatever that is, whether that's fitness, business, family, you know, whatever. What I'm saying is nothing, comfort breeds contempt, almost. Comfort makes you weak. It's okay to have a little bit of comfort, but if we seek too much comfort that is undeserving, it's going to cause us to suffer. It's going to cause us to suffer mentally. It's going to cause us to suffer physically. It's going to cause us to suffer because we were avoiding suffering. So, suffer now or suffer then. That's a quote that I always think about, especially when I'm preparing for fights. Suffer now or suffer then. And, you know, day to day, day by day, with our fitness, you can suffer now for this hour and feel great, you know, have lasting effects. You can suffer now for the moment, you know, 10 minutes while maybe you're not eating ice cream or whatever, and be healthier and live a longer life with your family. Or you can be more comfortable and you can suffer later. But me personally, I wanna I wanna be in the fight every day. I wanna try to achieve my potential. I don't know what that is. Maybe it's not that much. Maybe it is a lot. But I wanna see how far I can take it. And I wanna stay focused. And I think that's how we really achieve happiness. And um, that's why I love the movie Pursuit of Happiness. I love that movie. In the description below, I'm gonna put a great workout for you guys. You don't need a gym. You don't need anything. You just need a body. Even if you have injuries, you can still do this workout. It's gonna be a shadow boxing workout. I hope you guys enjoy the workout, and I hope you have an incredible day. And let's really try to get stronger today and achieve our goals and evolve.